Okay, next we're going to look at these verbal inflections in Samoan, which is an Austronesian language, and I did not write this in the handout, or maybe I cut it out of this data set by mistake, but these are also paired forms. For each of these there's a verb with the plain form on the left, and the form on the right adds the ergative feature to the verb. Ergative is a slightly complicated syntactic and semantic kind of property. It's not something you need to worry about in this class, but it's a feature that certain verbs can have. And so these are plain forms and ergative forms in Samoan. And again, we're going to start by trying to segment things. So what we see in this first example here, plain form is olo for rub, oloia for ergative rub. So what's happened here? It looks like ergative adds something at the end of the word. That is, it's a suffix. And in this case, we're finding the morph ia. Similarly with the next few, lafo, lafoia, anga, angaia. Everything's good so far. And then we get down to sa'ili, where if ia is the suffix here, then we would expect sa'ilia with a double e or a long e. That's not what we find. Instead, we find that there's just one e in the output. And if we keep looking down and we get some a1s, the same thing happens. With lele, fly, we don't get lele-ia, we get lele-a. So it looks like there's a second morph here. That's just ah. I'm going to put these dashes to show that these are suffixes, suffix morphs. Okay, so we have two allomorphs of this morpheme. Let's list where they occur. Obviously, the relevant thing here is going to be the preceding context, because these are suffixes, and the following context is always the end of a word. So where are we finding which one? Well, we're finding the ia one after o, after u, after ah. We're finding the just ah one after e and after a. Oh, I see a generalization. Who sees the generalization? Okay, what's going on here? Well, these are allomorphs of the same morpheme. It takes on this form when it's following a back vowel, and this form when it's following a front vowel. As of yet, there's still nothing here that tells us which one is the underlying representation. Maybe this is the underlying representation, and you can't have two back vowels in a row, so you insert a front vowel if this is following a back vowel. Or maybe this is the underlying representation, and you can't have two front vowels in a row, so you delete this when you're following a front vowel. Either one of those is a possible analysis so far. Now the interesting stuff starts, and the abstractness comes in the second column, the right half of this problem set. All of these words are different. All right, so we're again finding all ia suffixes in here, but now they're following all sorts of other things like la and fa and sa and ta. So it seems pretty clear that this is going to be the elsewhere context, and you want to make this the underlying representation. Just say it surfaces faithfully here, but there's a rule that says, a high front vowel becomes zero, that is, it deletes when it's following another front vowel. So far so good, but wait, look at these alternations. These consonants in words like stand, avoid, and collect, these are not in the simple verb forms. They only pop up when this suffix appears. What's going on here? Maybe there's like 11 different allomorphs. So we've been writing ia here, but maybe there's a lia allomorph, a fia allomorph, a sia allomorph, and so on and so forth. That's what you would think if you just went by the surface forms of these simple verb roots. But that really isn't going to work. You're not going to be able to predict what that consonant is. So for instance, we find sia following an o vowel, but we also find ingia following an o vowel and fia following an o vowel. So there's nothing phonologically predictable about these consonants, if they're unpredictable information, they better be in somebody's underlying representation somewhere. It doesn't seem like they're in the underlying representation of this morpheme, right? Because there's no way to predict all these different forms. So they must be part of the verb root. What that means is that the right analysis of a form like osofia, even though the isolation form is oso, and that might lead you to think that the morpheme boundary is here, it's not, right? Because we can't predict what kind of a consonant is appearing here. This is unpredictable information, therefore it better belong to the verb root. The actual morpheme boundary is here, osof ia. So what does that mean about the simple forms here? Because now in addition to this alternating suffix, we have a whole bunch of alternating verb roots. We have oso, osof. We have sao, saof, alo, alof, tau, taul, sau, saut, valu, valus, sio, siom. In fact, there's absolutely no generalization about the consonants here. It seems like any consonant can pop up preceding this vowel initial suffix. But at the end of a word, there are no consonants at all, just like in Maori, a language that is distantly related to Samoan. Interesting. So, what's actually going on here? Again, this is a case of abstraction because the simple verb forms would make you look at them and think, well, all verbs in Samoan end in vowels, and that would be kind of right. Simple verb forms do end in vowels in their simple form, but when you put this suffix on, you can see that actually there's a baffling variety of final consonants in these verb roots that simply don't surface at the end of a word. Interesting. So underlying representations here, again, because the nature and existence of this consonant in the ia forms is not predictable, it has to be part of the underlying representation of the verb. You can't say that this is the underlying representation because you'd never be able to write a rule that gets fa and sa and ta and la and ma to appear in the right places because those are not phonologically predictable. So this must be the underlying representation, in which case we're going to need a rule to get the simple form. What is that rule? Oh, take a consonant and turn it into 0, that is delete it when it's at the end of a word. So that handles all of these cases. The reason there's a bewildering variety of different consonants here is because they're in the lexical entries of these verbs. But when you don't have a following ergative suffix and you're at the end of a word, you have to delete that consonant. So again, this is a case where the simple citation form is not much like the underlying representation at all. There's an entire segment missing that you can only see when you put those verb roots in a more complex morphological context.